Hi guys, welcome back to Ash Talks Basketball, and today I'm doing the NBA Power Rankings so far. This season so far has been amazing and there's so much to talk about. A lot of teams have showed how good they can be and a lot of teams have showed how bad they can be. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video with the first tier. The first tier is the Pistons tier. They're so bad they get their own tier. At least there's something special about them right now. They have not won a game in 1.5 months. This team is truly deplorable. There's nothing good about this team other than the fact they might get a high pick this year. I don't know what to say, and I don't want to waste my voice on such a bad team. The next tier is the awful tier. These teams are trying to lose. These teams do not want to win games and they want a high draft pick. And starting off this tier, I've got the Charlotte Hornets. This team is awful. They're trying to get to LaMelo to be an all-star and that's just not happening. He's injured all the time and the team around him is trash. If you want someone to be good, surround him with good pieces. And right now, in no way that is happening, and they've got to find some sort of direction. Otherwise, LaMelo Ball's not going to be a Hornet for long. The next team is the San Antonio Spurs. Turns out, Victor Wembanyama as a rookie does not solve all your problems, and this team is still bad, and I didn't expect much more from them. Victor Wembanyama is having a really good rookie season, but they're still not going to be a good team. This is another learning year for them and another year where they can get a high draft pick and start developing a team to come back from this eerily long rebuild for them. The next team is the Wizards. Although they're really not great, I expected worse from them. Jordan Poole's looked bad, but Kyle Kuzma's looked pretty good, and it's probably been one of his best seasons ever. But as I said, I wasn't expecting much from them, and they didn't go much further than my expectations. This team is awful, and yet again, they're getting a pretty high draft pick. The next tier is bad. Not awful, but still not very good. They've got good pieces, but nowhere near enough pieces to become a playoff team, let alone a play-in team. I just don't see these teams working well, and I just feel like they're either on the way up or they're on their way down. The first team in this tier is the Utah Jazz. They have some good pieces. Keontae George looks good. Lauri Markkanen's still a great player, but they're not going to be great on any level, and I don't think they're getting high enough draft picks to rebuild their way into a playoff spot, and I just want to see them kind of go down or up from here. They're not that bad that they're going to get a top 4 pick, but they're not good enough to start getting away from that rebuilding zone and start building their team towards a playoff spot. The next team is the Portland Trail Blazers. They've got a few good pieces and they're on their way down after trading Damian Lillard, which they did get a good return on. And I like what they did there. They've got some good pieces to start the rebuild. DeAndre Ayton, Malcolm Brogdon, and a lot of picks. I think they've got a good stance on coming back into the playoff picture, but I still think it's going to be a few years till that happens. The next team is the Bulls, and this team has looked awful to start the year. I had some expectations for them, and they have been flattened. This team has looked awful to start the year. There's no direction for them, and I just don't see anything getting better for this team. They're not going to get anywhere near where they wanted to, and they're going to have to start the rebuild sooner or later, and that's going to start with a Zach LaVine trade. The next team I have is the Memphis Grizzlies. Yes, they've been awful to start the year, but I believe that Ja Morant will win a few games. But even with Ja, there's still major holes in this team, and it just doesn't seem like they're getting anywhere near the playoffs this year until they figure it out. They'll be okay. They might even make the play-in, but they're not getting any higher in my rankings until I see them have the ability to make the play-in. The next tier is mediocre. These teams are mid. they're not good, they're not bad, just in the middle. The next team I have is the Raptors, and man, this team is the definition of mid. And as a Raptors fan, I've been watching games, and I don't even think we can give them mid. Scotty Barnes looks good, and nothing else. I may be an annoyed Raptors fan, but this team needs a direction, man. We're not good, we're not bad. We need a direction. I would rather us be bad for a few years, get a few draft picks, and then be good. Because right now, this team is mid. The next team I have is the Brooklyn Nets. This team's been mid, but there has been some good bright spots. Like Mikal Bridges has looked good, Cam Thomas has had his breakout year, but in patches, and there's nothing coming good from this team. They're not going to be good, but at least there's some bright spots, unlike the Raptors. The next tier I have is above average / play-in. This team is going to be fighting for a playoff spot. They're going to try, but ultimately they're going to get a 7th or 8th seed. They might make the playoffs, but they're going to be fighting for it. And first team on this list is the Atlanta Hawks. And they've gone relatively unnoticed this season. Nothing interesting has happened, and they've done pretty much what everybody expected. They've been an above average team, and there's not much I can say about them. The next team is the Houston Rockets, and they have looked great to start the season. Sengun's looked like one of the best centers from his draft class, and he's looking like someone who can become a face of a franchise, but I don't think they're there yet. They've got a lot of good pieces, and they're going to look good in the regular season, but when it gets late in the season and teams are fighting for a playoff spot, I think that's where the Houston Rockets will start to fall off and maybe make the play-in and could sneak into a playoff spot near the bottom, but I don't see them making any damage this year. I think in maybe 2 or 3 years they could be great, just not this year. The last team in this tier, I have the Pelicans. They have looked pretty good to start the season. They went deep into the in-season tournament. Brandon Ingram's looked good. Zion's looked pretty overweight, but still, they're pretty good, but I don't see them doing well. I think they will make a playoff spot, but not a very high one. They're still not making waves in the league yet, and that's what we expected from Zion, especially in year 4 or 5, and I just expected more from him, and I just don't see anybody on this roster that will develop to make this team good enough. So there's going to be some moves if they want to be a good franchise in the next 2 to 3 years with Zion. The next tier I have is the regular season specialists, and these teams will do well in the regular season. They'll get a playoff spot, but ultimately they will fail in the playoffs because they're just not there yet. Maybe because of a missing piece, maybe because they're too young. I just don't see these teams making impacts in the playoffs yet. The first team in this tier is the New York Knicks, and I just think they need one extra piece to get them over the line. People like Donovan Mitchell and Zach LaVine have been seen on the trade blocks, and they might target them, but I just don't see their current team making waves in the playoffs. They're going to make it, but I don't see them doing well against teams like Philly, Milwaukee, and Boston, who are really talented compared to the Knicks, who are led by Jalen Brunson or Julius Randle, well, whoever's rolling that night, which proves their inconsistency and which will hurt them drastically when it comes playoff time. The next team is the Orlando Magic, and I know they've looked so good to start the season, one of the best teams out east, but I just can't trust them in the playoffs. They're such a young team, and I don't see them being consistent in the playoffs, and we will see this when it comes time for teams fighting for a playoff spot, and their inexperience will show, especially when it comes to big defensive games where they're fighting for a spot with experienced players like Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, and Jason Tatum. And that's why I just don't think they're there yet. They've got the potential to be, but just not yet. The next team is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and this young team has looked great. It's their breakout year so far. Everybody's looking good. They've drafted so many skilled rookies. They've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the best point guards in the league. Josh Giddey, a great second option. Chet Holmgren, one of the best rookies so far. And I just think this young team's going to be so good, but I just don't think they're there yet. They're going to have a big year, but I just see them folding too soon in the playoffs. Maybe in the next 3 years they could make some noise, but not now. The next team is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I just don't get it. They're great in the regular season, but they just can't get it done in the playoffs. And I just don't believe that this team will be good. Donovan Mitchell's great, Darius Garland's great, Evan Mobley's great. I just don't see this team making noise in playoffs because they're going to have to go up against hard teams like the Miami Heat, Boston, Milwaukee, and Philly. These teams, I think they struggle to beat in a 7-game series, and that's why I don't think this team is there yet. They have the potential to be good, but do they have the potential to be good enough? And knowing that Donovan Mitchell might not be a Cav for too much longer, is there a trade deadline move that they do to get them over the hump, to turn them from a good team to a great team? The next team is the Indiana Pacers. They've looked so good to start the season. They just lost in the in-season tournament finals to the Lakers, which was a great game. But I just think they're going to be one of those regular season teams that do so well. They get a 3rd seat, but they just don't do well in the playoffs because they don't have the experience to yet. I don't think they have enough pieces around Tyrese. I love this team. I hope they keep this team, but I don't think it's a good enough team to go up against, as I said, Boston, Milwaukee, and Philly. And those are the teams that they will have to face in the playoffs. And I just don't think they're there yet. In the regular season, they have shown that they can be good, but I can't trust them until they can show themselves in the playoffs. The next tier I have is the old but not gone tier. This tier is for the teams that I think are full of really skilled players, but I just don't believe in them staying consistent. They're a bit old, they're an aging team, and I just don't think they're going to get over the hump. They have the ability to, but the question is, will they? And the first team on this list is obviously the Warriors. It just isn't working in the regular season. Chris Paul and Steph Curry has worked surprisingly well together, but where's the offense other than Curry? Wiggins is struggling. Clay's having one of his worst seasons ever. People are saying trade Clay, but that's never happening. They need to find a way out of this, and hopefully playoff intensity brings out the best in them. I know they will struggle, and they did struggle last year with a better performing roster, but you can never count out a team with Steph Curry on them. The next team is the Clippers, and we all know they were going to be on this tier. They're old and inconsistent, but they've got so much talent on their team you can't count them out. The only question is, can they stay healthy and reliable? And that's a big if. If they can be healthy, this is one of the best teams in the league. And we've seen time and time again that health is a major factor and surprisingly hard for their main players like Kawhi and PG. And we know that James Harden can be a loose cannon when it comes to things like wanting a trade, which could happen if the regular season does not go to plan. The next tier I have is another year or two. So I think these teams are good, but I just don't think they're there yet. Maybe they're missing a piece that they need to get, or they have a bit of untapped potential. I just don't think these teams are there yet. They're pretty good and they should be fared in the playoffs, but I don't think they should be considered as a title contender yet. The first team on this list is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They've come out guns blazing this year, and they've got the best record out west. Anthony Edwards has been great. Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert finally worked together, but I just think they've got one more year of growth. They took a huge step, but maybe there's another step in their way before they come as a title contender next year. Maybe a trade, maybe more potential coming out of Anthony Edwards, which is very probable. He has so much room to grow and he can be such a good basketball player. I just don't think Minnesota are going to win it this year. But Minnesota fans should be hopeful because their team looks red hot. The next team is the Sacramento Kings, and this team has looked good. Domantas Sabonis looking like one of the best centers in the league. De'Aaron Fox still a really good scorer, and they've got great pieces around them. But I just don't see them winning yet. It might be a trade. There might be some potential coming out of Malik Monk, or even De'Aaron Fox can still grow a bit. But I just don't see them being enough to win a championship. But this year, I think they could prove me wrong because they are looking really good to start the year. The next team on the list is the Dallas Mavericks, and they've came out of the year really good. They've started well, and I just believe they've got one more year to gel. Kyrie and Luka started off badly. Now they're working well together. Maybe next year they finally become a contending team because there's so much skill on that team. Derek Lively is probably going to be really good next year. He's going to take a leap, and I think next year is their best hope of winning a championship. Luka's always improving. Kyrie's still really good. Derek Lively was a great pick, and I just see this Mavs team finally coming together to make a great team, maybe a contender team. My next tier is the glass chandelier tier. Beautiful, great, but fragile. The first team in this tier is the Lakers. They were so good in the in-season tournament, just won it last night, and I have so much faith in them being good. But can they stay consistent in the playoffs? Russell Westbrook's now off their team, so they can gel a bit better. Austin Reeves looks good, but can they win playoff games? With LeBron, the answer is normally yes, but there's so much skill out west. Can they beat a team like the Denver Nuggets, who will be competing for another championship this year? The next team is the Miami Heat. At their best, one of the best teams in the league, arguably the best. At their worst, maybe a play-in team, and that's the question. Jimmy Butler can drop 50 every playoff game, but will he? We saw in the playoffs he lost steam when it came to the games against Boston and Denver, and that's why they ultimately lost. But they can win championships if Jimmy Butler stays consistent, which it sounds easier than it is because consistent for Jimmy Butler's averaging 40 points a game. But this team has the ability to win a championship. But the question is, will they? The next team I have is the Phoenix Suns. When they're healthy, they have three of the best scorers in the league. When they're not healthy, they're fragile as hell. And their two big questions is consistency and defense. Their defense isn't that great. They're relying on Jusuf Nurkic, which in the first place isn't a defensive anchor, and they just don't have enough defensive consistency. And they rely so much on scoring when their three main guys are rarely playing together. If they can show in the regular season that they will play together, this team could be top 3 in the league. If they're not playing together, maybe top 10, matters how many are playing. Bradley Beal's been out for a while. I just want to see how well this team can play if they're all healthy in a playoff game. Because obviously, can three primary scorers defend well on the court at the same time? The next team is Philly. I really like this team. Joel Embiid's a great scorer, great defender. Tyrese Maxey has looked great to start the year, and they've got good pieces around them. But the question is, can they get past the second round? And I think that answer could be the yes this year. They've got a lot of pieces. They're going to have to beat Milwaukee or Boston to get to the second round. And that's the big question. Are they good enough to do that? And I think my answer is maybe. If they're consistent, Joel Embiid can win any game by himself. So can they find their groove against two of the toughest teams? If they can beat Milwaukee or Boston, that's really good. But are they going to beat Milwaukee or Boston, who are two of the hardest matchups, two of the best teams in the league? I think Philly are good, but I don't think they're good enough to compete with the really strong East we have right now. In at 3, I've got the Celtics. Great regular season team, good playoff team, but they're good enough. The big question is, can they beat Milwaukee in a 7-game series? It's going to be a series for the ages, and honestly, whoever wins that has a pretty good chance of winning the title. They're going to have to go up against Denver probably in the NBA Finals, but I think both of these teams could beat Denver in a 7-game series, and I'm looking forward to seeing Milwaukee face off against Boston for the Eastern Conference. The next team I have is the reigning champs. Obviously, they're really good, but since the Milwaukee Bucks got Lillard, I think they have the better chance. Obviously, Denver have the odds to get out of the West, and I don't see any teams stopping them. But the real question is, will they win the NBA Finals? And I think that answer might be no this year. There's so many talented teams out east, Boston and Milwaukee. One of those teams will face off against Denver. Denver's big question is, will they beat them in a 7-game series? And the final team I have is the Milwaukee Bucks. And this team is just too good. Damian Lillard, one of the best playoff scorers of all time. Giannis, one of the best players in the world. Chris Middleton, a great backup player to add to the big two of Damian Lillard and Giannis. Brook Lopez having one of his best seasons. And I just think we're all forgetting how stacked this team is. And because we haven't seen it for a while, we've forgotten how good of a playoff scorer Lillard can be, and he is one of the clutchest NBA players we've ever seen. I think Milwaukee will win the title this year. And that's all I have for you today. So thank you for watching the video. Tell me who you think will win the NBA championship in the comments down below, and have a nice day.